My name is Patrick Donovan. I'm the executive director here at the Varnum Armory Museum in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. We house the largest collection of Rhode Island military history in existence. Our collection spans thousands of objects going back to the 17th century all the way through to the present day. It's owned and operated by a 501c3 nonprofit. We're all volunteer, and the name of the parent organization is the Varnum Continentals, Inc. And our mission here is to preserve and share Rhode Island military history to inspire and educate the public. So one of the common questions we get here is, where do all these artifacts come from? And the bulk of our collection has been in this building literally since the 1920s, 1930s, and 40s. They were donations by our early members. Our earliest, one of our founders, one of our longest serving leaders, president of the organization, our commander, was Howard Vernon Allen, who lived just a mile up the road. And he was a very wealthy person. He had owned 2 businesses, and he was a very aggressive collector of military relics. And so he would often write letters to friends, to other museums, to the military, asking for things to be donated. And so these things have been building up over time. We do have several items that are on loan to us, including the 2 Civil War cannons that you see here. Those are on loan to us from the state of Rhode Island. The Rhode Island National Guard has a number of items that are on display here as well. Yeah, so this is one of my favorite objects. It's an incredible story. The Gettysburg gun. It belonged to Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery. A battery in the American Civil War had 6 of these cannons. It'd be 6 guns, about 100 Rhode Islanders, about 100 horses that would make up this battery. And it earns its name, of course, at the Battle of Gettysburg. This is the biggest battle in the American Civil War. Confederate General Robert E. Lee invades into south central Pennsylvania. The 2 armies collide in the small town of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. There's about 165,000 Americans fighting each other over 3 days, just unbelievable in scale and carnage. By the end of that fight, there's 51,000 killed, wounded, or missing. And Battery B and the Gettysburg gun are right in the center of this fight. They arrive on the battlefield on day 2, July 2nd. However, it really earns its name on the 3rd and final day of the battle, July 3rd. On that day, Confederate General Robert E. Lee decides to attack the Union center, right where Battery B was located. And he would send 12,000 Confederate infantry, what's famously known as Pickett's Charge, the most famous military charge in American history. Preceding that infantry assault, he had massed about 125 cannons across a 2-mile front. And at 1 p.m. on July 3rd, a signal gun would go off, and all of these cannons would just start firing repeatedly, focusing their fire near where Battery B was located. It was described as the loudest event in human history at this point in time. They could hear the gunfire as far away as Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 35 miles away. The men talked about how the ground literally shook beneath their feet. Now, during this great cannonade, Battery B begins to return fire. And William Jones, on the left of the card there, William Jones had a premonition the day before that he was not going to survive this battle. He expressed this to his men. Despite that, he volunteered to relieve an exhausted cannoneer in the #1 position. So William Jones is here. Alfred Gardner, the man in the middle, he's in his mid-40s. He has 5 children at home. His wife's name is Adelia. He's a very religious man. In the pocket of his coat at this moment, he has a Bible, and his name's embossed in the Bible. And in the margins of the pages of this Bible, he uses it as like a diary. He would write little messages to his 5 children, words of advice, words of wisdom, really emotionally charged things. Alfred is the #2 man. He's standing on the other side. John Green, known as the sturdy Irishman, he was standing behind the axle on the other side there. Alfred takes a bag of powder. He inserts it into the tube. William rams the powder charge down, and Alfred takes that cannonball. He's about to place it in the muzzle. He's turning, and as he does this, a Confederate artillery shell would strike the muzzle of the cannon. You see the dent in about the 4 o'clock position. That shell would explode. It would partially decapitate William Jones, throws him several feet forward. Alfred would have his left arm severed below the shoulder. He would get a gaping wound in his rib cage, and he would be laying against the front of that wheel. And he would be laying there bleeding to death, but still conscious, and he's holding his one arm outstretched. His best friend, his tent mate, Albert Strait, who was the sergeant of this gun, immediately goes to his aid. They had made a pact, actually. If either one of them were ever wounded, they would immediately go to his aid. True to his word, Albert goes to Alfred. He says he grabs his hand, and he said the first words out of Alfred's mouth was, "Please tell my wife I died happy. Please, please make sure she gets my Bible." Albert says they're under fire. He doesn't take the Bible right away. He bids farewell, and he says he turns his back, and he hears Alfred yell out in a loud and clear voice, "Glory be to God. Hallelujah. I am happy. Amen." And moments later, he would bleed out and die. Meanwhile, they're in the midst of the battle. They're still trying to load and fire this gun. Albert picks up the ball that Alfred had dropped, and he sticks it exactly where you see it right now. And because of the dent, it becomes stuck in the muzzle. And over time, as that barrel would cool, it would basically fuse to the shell, to the cannonball. Albert yells for an axe, and he takes the backside of an axe, and he's standing there, and he's like wailing, trying to drive that cannonball home. And as he's doing this, another shell would strike the axle of the gun. You can see the battle damage, the dent. It blows out the spoke on the backside of the wheel. The trail, the wooden tail of the carriage is split. You can see all of this damage still today. It throws the gun up on one wheel. And when this happens, they abandon the gun. Tragically, standing in that spot behind the axle was John Green on the right of the card. And he would take wood and metal into his torso, and he would linger in a field hospital for 2 weeks, and it would die. So these 3 Rhode Islanders died manning this gun on July 3rd, 1863. The next day, they repulse Pickett's charge. It's a big victory for the North. They hold their position on July 4th. They dig a hole in front of their gun, and they wrap William Jones and Alfred in red blankets, and they're about to bury them. Albert remembers the Bible, and he asks one of his men to go retrieve that Bible from Alfred's pocket. We have this Bible on display downstairs in our 19th century room. When you read the inscriptions in the Bible, you completely understand why those were his dying words, to make sure his family got this Bible. The last entry in the Bible says, July 2nd, 1863, the day before he dies. He says, Gettysburg, in battery, all ready for action. I am well in body, and my mind is clear about the future. The thought of heaven has cheered me on this march from Falmouth to Pennsylvania. And he writes, children, exclamation point, always be of good cheer and always do right. This is the wish of your father. Those would be the last words that he would send to his children. The Bible would be sent home to his wife, Adelia. Another story I'd like to tie this off with is we have a lot of interesting synchronistic things that happen to us here. We have an uncanny ability of finding Rhode Island military history that's been lost outside of our state, and we find this and we bring it back home. A recent example, we know from letters that Alfred wrote to his family that he would often pick wildflowers along the march in the battlefields, and he would take these flowers, fold them up in his letters, and he would send them home to his wife Adelia. We just knew this from the letters he wrote. We share these stories on social media, Facebook, Instagram. And one day, about 1.5 years ago, an active duty Army officer in Maryland messaged me. And he says, I've got something you're gonna want related to the story. Okay, and I met this collector in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania at a show. And he comes in and he has a box and opens it up, and inside is a little black ledger book. And when we opened it, on the inside cover, and written in pencil, it said Adelia Gardner, 1870. And as we turn the pages, on all of the pages were the original flowers that he had mailed home that she pasted carefully, and she noted the date and location of all the flowers that he picked. What are the odds, right, that this would still exist, A, and B, that it would end up back here, back with Alfred's stuff, back with the Gettysburg gun. It gives you goosebumps. And we have that on display downstairs too. Right here in front of me is the Bible of Alfred G. Gardner embossed on the cover is his name. His picture there is on the left side of the card. But Alfred Gardner was the number 2 man on the Gettysburg gun. He died with that Bible in his pocket, and he wrote messages to his 5 children, words of advice, words of wisdom, in the margins of the pages. He used it like a diary, and his last dying words in part were, "Please make sure my family gets this Bible." And his best friend, the sergeant of the Gettysburg gun, Albert Strait, that's pictured on the right of the card, he would send that Bible home to Adelia, and he would write a letter to Alfred's widow explaining how Alfred died. So in front of me now is a ledger book that belonged to Alfred Gardner's wife, Adelia. This was given to us recently. Amazing that this still exists, but Alfred, when he would write a letter to his wife, Adelia, he would often pick wildflowers along the march and at battlefields, and he would fold these flowers up in his letters and mail them home to her. We just knew that from letters that still existed today, but we had no idea that the flowers have survived. And a fellow collector, he was an active duty Army officer in Maryland, contacted us to offer this ledger book. We have no idea how it got into the collector's market, but inside the cover it says Adelia Gardner, 1870 something, and then on all these subsequent pages she had pasted in all the original flowers that her late husband had picked during the Civil War. She pasted them in this book, and she carefully noted the date and location of where they were picked. And we have it open to this particular page because it says June 22nd, 1863, Falmouth, Virginia, the last, ... So these are the last flowers that he picked before he would be killed, mortally wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 3rd, 1863. So this display case is focused on the 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia. They were the first volunteer infantry regiment to lead Providence to fight in the American Civil War. They were one of the first regiments to reach Washington, D.C. And one of the more emotional artifacts that we have in our collection is this pair of cotton gloves stained with the blood of Lieutenant Henry Prescott, who was a company commander in the 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia. He was a very wealthy person. He had 5 children. He's from Providence. He was absolutely beloved by the men. They viewed him as a father figure, so much so that before they left Providence, a group of his men went behind his back to the governor and tried to get him assigned to desk duty in Providence. Henry finds out about this and he throws a fit. He's like, "Of course I'm going with you guys." And sure enough, not long after that, in the first major battle of the American Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run, July 21st, 1861, the very first volley that the Confederates fire, Henry Prescott is shot through the head. And standing behind Henry Prescott was Private William DeBlois, who was wearing these cotton gloves. And multiple accounts suggest that William DeBlois cradled Prescott in his arms and lowered him to the ground. So when he's shot, he's the first guy in the unit to be hit. The men are in complete shock, and they freeze. And the line officers are running up and down the company, yelling at the men to keep going because they're still under fire. And one of the officers would write after the battle that the men eventually regained their composure and were seen loading their muskets with tears streaming down their cheeks over his loss. So this beautiful American guidon flag belonged to the 1st Rhode Island Cavalry. Troop L, you see the L in the center. The 1st Rhode Island Cavalry was a hard-fighting unit. They enlisted in the fall of 1861, and they went all the way through all 4 years of the war, all the way to the end with Lee's surrender. This is one of only 2 Rhode Island battle flags ever to be captured by the enemy in battle. So this happens at the Battle of Middleburg, which is part of the Gettysburg campaign. As Robert E. Lee and his Confederate Army invades towards the North is freaking out. Where is Lee going? Is he attacking D.C.? Is he going after Baltimore, Harrisburg, Philadelphia? And so they put the 1st Rhode Island Cavalry well out in front of the Union Army with the goal to find and locate Lee and see where his army is headed. They knew he was in the Shenandoah Valley. To get into look into the valley, they had to peek through the mountain gaps. And guarding those mountain gaps were Confederate cavalry units. And so at the Battle of Middleburg's near one of these gaps, 285 Rhode Islanders would ride into the town, and they would almost capture Confederate Cavalry General Jeb Stuart. He was there alone with some staff officers. Jeb Stuart would hightail it out of there. The Rhode Islanders were ordered to spend the night, so they barricaded themselves in the town, and they ended up getting surrounded by about 10x their number by Confederate cavalry. And over a 12-hour period, they literally fought for their lives. And by the end of that fight, only about 60 survived. Most were captured, some killed, many wounded. But this flag was captured in that battle that day. It ends up in a museum in North Carolina. And in 2008, the Adjutant General of Rhode Island got a phone call, and he said that this person with a Southern accent says, "Hey, we have your flag. We'd like to return it." And this person is a friend of mine today, and he's telling me the story, and he says that, you know, they talked through the logistics, and at the end of the phone call, the guy from North Carolina says, "By the way, you have one of our flags. Can we have it back?" And they were talking about a Confederate flag that's over there, and that Confederate flag was captured in battle by the 4th Rhode Island Infantry in a desperate charge that they made, but there was about 500 Union casualties in that battle. And I said to the general, I said, "What did you say in response?" Assuming he's not exaggerating, he told me that he said, "Over my dead body, will you get that flag back? You lost the war, and too many Rhode Islanders died capturing that flag. It's going to stay right here." Despite this disagreement, they still return the cavalry flag. It belongs to the Rhode Island National Guard today, and they've allowed us to display it. One of the men that was in the Battle of Middleburg, where this flag was captured, is Lyman Aylesworth of North Kingstown. We have his uniform, his sword, and we have pictures of him as a soldier. We've had this in our collection since the 1920s, but Lyman had his horse shot out from under him in this battle, and he would hide in the bushes until the battle passed by him, and then he would walk for several days to get back to his men. And then in this case, we have the equipment and arms of George Bennett of East Greenwich. He's in the 1st Rhode Island Cavalry, and he was in this Battle of Middleburg, and he's actually captured, and he becomes a POW. He's lucky. He's only a POW for a couple of months, and then he's exchanged. He had the option. He could have been discharged. He could have come back to East Greenwich and lived a comfortable life. He's just a kid. But he's like, I can't leave my men. I can't leave my buddies. And so he decides to re-enlist for another year, and he would fight the rest of the Civil War with the equipment that you see in this case. So this is one of the crown jewels of our collection. This is a leather artillery helmet worn during the American Revolutionary War by Captain Lieutenant Benajah Carpenter of Providence, Rhode Island. He's an officer in what is known as the United Train of Artillery Militia. They're the founding company of the U.S. artillery under Henry Knox and George Washington. They were at the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Long Island, the biggest battle in the American Revolutionary War, the Battle of Rhode Island as well. Sadly, at Long Island, he and some Maryland infantry were tasked with holding off British forces so that Washington and the Continental Army could escape to fight another day. And he's commanding a 2-gun battery at the Battle of Long Island, and he would be shot reportedly through the head, and he would die in this fight. The hat would survive. We've learned that this is incredibly rare. There's only a small handful of American military hats from the Revolutionary War. We loaned this to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. They had it for their opening year, and their conservator told us that the paint that you see on this hat is original, which is amazing to me. So you have the fouled Rhode Island anchor, and then underneath the anchor in Latin it says, "In God we hope," which is the traditional Rhode Island militia motto. And then what I love is above the anchor it says, "For our country." And this is 1775. We're not a country yet, but it gives you an idea of the mindset of the patriots that were fighting against the British in this war. Amazing that it survived. So as the curator and executive director, I've spent a lot of time over the years digging through closets, going through boxes of things that people haven't looked at in years and years. I keep thinking I've gone through everything. But I continue to find amazing objects. So a couple of years ago, I was going through some random boxes of receipts, just receipts from like the 1950s, 1960s, basically junk. And I almost threw the box in the trash at one point, but I reached into this box one last time and I grabbed a fistful of paper and I immediately felt that old 18th century paper feel. And I pull it out and it turns out to be a letter. I immediately look at the date. I see that it's a wartime to the Revolutionary War, 1781. Ooh, I get excited. I read the letter. Long story short, this is a letter that was authored by a black soldier in the 1st Rhode Island Black Regiment of 1778. So during the Revolutionary War, early on, blacks were not allowed to serve, even though there were examples of people doing that. Officially, they were not allowed to serve. And it was James Mitchell Varnum who passed the idea to George Washington that we could raise more soldiers by allowing African Americans to serve in the military. Rhode Island passes a law. Rhode Island was the first colony to do this, that gave enslaved people their permanent freedom in exchange for their service. It was not a popular law. It did not last very long. A little over 100 were able to take advantage of this, but this soldier that authored this letter was Thomas Nichols of Warwick, Rhode Island. He'd been enslaved to Benjamin and Phoebe Nichols of Warwick. He's writing this letter, amazingly, to his former owners, Ben and Phoebe Nichols. And he's basically asking for help to get a discharge because, quote, war is disagreeable to my mind as well as destructive to my health. It's a very sad letter. I get the distinct feeling that Thomas has PTSD. He says he has fits. He's unable to continue on. He was wounded at the Battle of Rhode Island about 1.5 years earlier. You know, is that neurological damage from his wound? Or is it some sort of mental problems? But he says he has no money, no clothes fit to wear. He just wants to go home. And it's an amazing letter. We've learned that there's only 2 letters, one other letter, in addition to this one, written by a black soldier during the Revolutionary War. And I almost threw it away. This is soon going to go on display at the National Museum of the U.S. Army for the 250th anniversary. This print here, art done by the artist Don Troiani, depicts a 1st Rhode Island black soldier. The U.S. Army is making a life-size, lifelike cast figure of a soldier in the 1st Rhode Island Black Regiment that will be displayed with the letter. And then, excitedly for us, after that exhibit's over, that cast figure is going to go here on display, which is awesome. So we're in our exhibit room that's called the World Wars Collection. It's World War I, World War II artifacts. And this is the uniform of Private Jesse Whaley of East Greenwich, Rhode Island, right here where the armory is located. Jesse was a bit older when he went into the military service. He was actually drafted, did not want to serve in the military, but he ends up going. And right after his training, he immediately goes into the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which is one of the biggest campaigns of World War I. And one night at midnight, he has to make a charge across no man's land, that barren, empty space between the 2 trenches, where it's called no man's land because huge risk to your life to try to cross that. He said that they lined up, whistles blown, they start crossing across no man's land. It's pitch black, and someone on the German side fires a flare in the sky. It explodes and illuminates the ground below for a few seconds. And he says right at this moment, he sees a German rise up out of a shell hole and throws a potato masher grenade. And he sees it turning, flying towards him. He says he tries to duck. The grenade explodes. It kills the guy on his left, kills the guy on his right, and it hits him in his temple, and it blinds him permanently. He ends up in the hospital. He's sent home to Rhode Island, completely blind, unable to see his family, his friends. The Army actually sends him to a school to learn how to use a Braille machine. He's there with other blinded veterans. either blinded by shrapnel or, bullets or by poison gas. And in the school, he's learning how to use a Braille machine. And one day he's getting on a bus after class to go back to wherever he was staying. And as he got on this bus, he tripped on the stairs getting onto the bus. And the woman behind him catches him and helps him get on his feet again, gets him on the bus, puts him in a seat. And this woman ends up sitting next to him. And they start talking. They become friends. They start dating. And sure enough, they get married. According to the family descendants, they had a wonderful marriage over 50 years. They had 5 sons. 2 of those sons are still alive today. They're the ones who donated the uniform. We were told he was quite the person. He had a glass eye that he used to pull out and scare the grandkids with. His wife used to read him the newspaper every morning at the dining room table. Anyway, one of the first things that he authored on a Braille machine was a first-hand account of his wounding. And we have a transcript of it here, but it was published in the New York Times. And we have a picture of Jesse posing with his Braille machine. The Braille machine actually is going to go on display here too. But if you look closely on the side of his forehead, you can see the scar and the indentation from the wounding that he received. But I always like to tell people, here's someone who had every reason to be mad, to be pissed off at the world, to, be depressed about things. But he didn't do that. He embraced life. He lived to his fullest. He marched in every Memorial Day and Veterans Day parade. And we have pictures of him strutting big. You can't see a thing, but he's walking down at the back of the parade. So I wish I could have met Jesse. He would have been something. So in my hands is one of the rarest firearms that we have in our museum collection. It's a pattern 1770 Sergeant's carbine. It was produced at Dublin Castle in Ireland. These roughly 1,500 of these were produced. They were only issued to sergeants of a grenadier company. So the grenadiers in a British regiment were the you can think of them as like the special forces of the British Army. They tended to be the fastest, the most athletic, the tallest, the best shots in the unit. They were used as shock troops. And in a regiment, they were the 4th company in the order of battle. Not only is it rare for those reasons, this one happens to be regimentally marked on the top of the barrel. You can just make out now 24th Regiment of Foot. One of our members is Don Hagest. He's an author. He's an expert on British military history. And he actually, while he was in London, he was able to track down the original muster roll for this regiment. And he narrowed it down to the specific sergeant that carried this musket. Incredibly rare to be able to do that with an 18th century artifact like this. But it was John Hughes was his name. And we know John was with the regiment when this would have been issued, and he was also with the regiment when they were defeated at the Battle of Saratoga, one of the only tactical victories for the American Army during the Revolutionary War. Incredibly important battle strategically. It was our victory in that battle, you could argue, that convinced the French to come in on the American side. And you could also make the argument that it's because of the French involvement that we were able to gain our independence. So this is an incredibly rare piece with an amazing history. It likely would have been reissued to an American soldier and used throughout the rest of the war. So one of the experiences that sticks out in my mind, a paranormal experience, I was in this room with a person who was here for a tour, just one other person. We were looking into this case, the both of us, and we have video surveillance over the building, so I'm able to see who's in the building or not. When someone walks in the building, you can hear that. You can hear the door. You can hear the footsteps of the person coming in. So we were very surprised as we were looking into this case. With the door open to the hallway, we suddenly hear very loud whistling. And both of us immediately turned to the doorway because it was right there in the hallway. There's nothing there. It was very bizarre. And I said, hello, and just complete silence, and then nothing happened. But it was a male whistling sound. I've been told that the previous curator used to whistle a lot, and so I always wondered, is it that person? You know, there is a sidewalk right outside of this wall. There's a street here, so I literally went outside. I had the guest, the tourist, stay here as I went outside the window, and I whistled to see, is this what we heard? And it clearly was not. It was, you know, very muffled, obviously on the other side of a brick wall on the street. So can't explain it. Very strange. So we're in the Hall of Pictures, as we call it. It's a long hallway downstairs in the museum. This has definitely been the area where we hear a lot of activity. We'll be in the individual museum rooms. And for the longest time, we had a long carpet down here. The door makes a very particular sound when the doorknob is turned and open. So we'll hear that. You'll hear the door open. You'll hear footsteps on the carpet. Or there's times where you don't hear the door open, and all of a sudden you hear the sound of someone walking down this hallway, which is always very disconcerting. In one instance, this was several years ago, it was actually Halloween, and I was in the museum room at the end of the hallway, and as I'm sitting there, I'm doing work on my laptop, and I hear what sounds like someone stepping into the hallway, and the way I heard it, it sounded like they turned and walked into this room. That's what it sounded like when I heard it. And so I knew no one was in the building, so I immediately yell out, hello, who's there? Get no response. And on the security cameras, you see me get up and look into the hallway, and there's no one here, of course. So then I watched the playback of the security camera footage, and there's a camera at the far end of the hall, and you see the doorknob turn. It goes like this, and then it slowly comes back up. And when you zoom in really closely, there looks like there's like a gray shadow, and then it moves to the kitchen, which matches exactly what I thought I heard happen. Again, we have security cameras all over the building. I can immediately access it on my laptop or my phone, so I can check to see if someone is in the building that we didn't expect. And you can't really get into the building without us hearing you come in. So it's always disturbing when it happens. My first gut reaction is not necessarily paranormal when I hear something like that. Hear someone on the staircase or walking down the hallway or walking overhead in the drill hall. My initial thought is there's an intruder. There's someone in this building that's not supposed to be here. And you get spooked when you're here at night when that happens. And, you know, when you find out there's no one here, you definitely get more scared. I feel comfortable here. I don't feel like there's anything here that's threatening or dark in any way per se. But, you know, when you're by yourself, you're here at night, and these things happen to you, I'll admit that more than once I've decided, all right, time to go home. So we had a very interesting experience happen to us here. It happened just before I got into this room. I was with a friend and a colleague, our treasurer. He's a Army veteran, very solid guy, not prone to fantasy or exaggeration. This person had never had a paranormal experience before, but we were moving chairs from downstairs, coming up the staircase, and then stacking them here in the drill hall. And his name is Tim. He was ahead of me by 30 feet. And I was still coming up the stairs. And by the time I got into this room, it was dark, except we had a little bit of lighting in the back, so you could see things in here, but it was dark. And he's standing about where I'm standing, and he's just facing this way, like he's frozen. I could tell something was wrong. And I'm like, Tim, what happened? And he turns to me, and he's like, look at my arms. And all the hair on his forearms were standing straight up, and he had goosebumps. And I'm like, what happened? And he said, I think I saw a ghost. I'm like, what? What'd you see? And he said to me that as he walked into the doorway into this drill hall, he saw move from left to right in front of the guns a person, a torso, from the waist up. And it looked like a short man wearing short sleeves, open collared shirt, button-down shirt, slick back, black hair. And it was from the side, and it was like this kind of movement. And he said the thing that really freaked him out is that there was no legs, and the movement of the person was very fast, and it didn't match his arm swing. I mean, I 100% trust this person. They were visibly disturbed. And the other interesting thing is his description of this particular person, and Tim had never met this person in his life before, matches a caretaker that we used to have live in the building. He lived in this building for 30 years, and he matches that description exactly. So we always wonder, was it that person? So the other significant event that we were told about that happened in this space is after events, we do dinners and rentals of the space, and we have cleaning crew come in, and we had hired this woman who was the daughter of one of our trustees of the board. And I knew this person, I know the trustee very well, and she had her own cleaning business. And one night she was here late at night cleaning, and all of a sudden, she felt a hand placed on her and a male voice right in her ear saying, "You'll be okay." And apparently she dropped everything. She called her father, our trustee, and was absolutely in tears and in shock over this. And she has literally not been back in the building since. This was a few years back. So a lot of people that we talk to about these paranormal experiences, there's an assumption that, we have all this war material. We have uniforms, flags, weapons that have been witnesses and direct participants in some of the most ugly events in human history, involving a lot of death and pain, including items that were worn by people who were killed in battle. And so, we wonder, are some of these things that we're experiencing, is it some sort of attached energy to these objects? Is there something left behind, emotion or something? And I'm certainly open-minded to that. We've done EVP recordings in this building before, and surprisingly, the EVPs that we've gotten tend to be women and children so far. But there's a lot of activity. This has been a community meeting place for well over a century. And there was a bank in this location before that. So it's hard to know sometimes, I think, what the source of this activity is. But I have to imagine that at least some of it is tied to the material, to the artifacts that are in this building.